I've spent a lot of time the last few years wondering why Americans don't celebrate Constitution Day. And it occurred to me, we have spent so much time and effort trampling the document, along with the freedoms and liberties it's designed to protect. We the people are simply too apathetic to celebrate the Constitution, or too ashamed to do so. However, for those of us not embarrassed by our founding document, there is still hope to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. So we'll take a look at that next on the Constitution Study.
Neighbors and have a few good friends. Every day we're everyday Americans. Oh, every day we're everyday Americans.
Hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution. Teach your Rising Generation be free. I'm glad you could join me today. Constitution Day is a day, well, I ignored most of my life. Now I see it come around every year as an opportunity to spread the news, get other people excited and involved. And one of the things I'm doing is I've partnered with another study group that has an interesting online class you can take. And as a member of the Constitution Study, you can even get a free lesson. I'll talk more about that at the end of the episode. But for now, let's take a look at the Constitution and remember Constitution Day. Like most Americans, I went through school without learning very much about the Constitution. Sure, I learned about the three branches of government, but most of what I was taught about that fact was a lie. I learned about the Bill of Rights too, but most of what I was taught about that was a lie as well. While I didn't think too much about it at the time, this lack of education turns out to have been extremely dangerous. Ronald Reagan warned us about the impact apathy has on our freedom.
But freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Think about the freedoms you enjoy. The ideals and concepts that are so much a part of the warp and woof of society, we've come to believe they are normal. However, a look at history shows that freedom is not the natural state of affairs for man. Subjugation is. A vast number of people throughout human history have been subjects of one form of autocratic rule or another. Kingdoms and empires are the norm. Greece tried a democracy, but they eventually conglomerated and centralized into another form of autocracy. Rome was a republic until Octavian became the first emperor. Then in 1776, a group of freedom fighters declared independence from their mother country, winning their freedom in 1783. Then in 1787, in an attempt to stabilize the union they had created, they replaced the Articles of Confederation with a new constitution. However, there were still those who sought to enslave their fellow countrymen. Of course, most of those who wanted to control others didn't see it as enslaving them. Rather, they believed most of them simply thought they knew better how things should be done, and the necessity for others to agree. Yet William Pitt the Younger said, "Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves." Every infringement on human freedom starts with the idea that the ends justify the means. What was true when William Pitt the Younger was speaking from the House of Commons in 1783 is just as true today. The need to deal with COVID was the necessity to take control of your health and, in fact, your life. The need to keep you safe is the claim behind every act to infringe your rights to defend yourself. And the need to make sure you have the correct facts stands squarely behind all the calls for censorship and your right to both express yourself and to hear what other people think. And we the people simply go along, in large part, I believe, because of our ignorance. And for many years, I included myself in that cabal of ignorance. Several years ago, I was in North Carolina, working with a couple of international teams. It was a presidential election year, so one day at lunch, someone asked about the Electoral College. Since I was the only American on the teams, they expected me to explain this system to them. This was before I had started studying the Constitution, so I stumbled through what I'd been taught in school, but ultimately, I failed. Here I was, a natural-born citizen of the United States, yet unable to explain to a curious group of foreigners how the president was elected. To my great shame, even that was not enough to get me to actually read the Constitution, which explains the process so well. How can it be that so many born and raised in this country don't know how its government works? I believe the answer is simple. We don't read the foundational laws that created it. So even though our first Chief Justice, John Jay, said, every member of the state ought diligently to read and study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation be free. By knowing their rights, they'll sooner perceive when they are violated, be the better prepared to defend and assert them. Why do you think the first Chief Justice of the United States thought it so important that everyone read and study the Constitution of the United States? He gave the answer in his quote, so we will sooner perceive when our rights are violated and be better prepared to defend and assert them. Which to me begs the question, if reading and studying the Constitution is so important, why do we not teach the rising generation be free? After all, the Constitution isn't taught in public school or most private schools. Based on my research, it's not even taught in our law schools, where you think it would be most important for it to be taught. So why isn't the foundational document taught? I believe the evidence is plain. There's only one reason the rising generation is not taught to be free. See, Samuel Adams said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties, nor can any be easily subdued, when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved. On the contrary, when people are universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink under their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders." How better to get people to give up their rights and liberties without a fight? Without knowledge about our rights and the tools we have to defend them, the people are more easily persuaded by the siren song of necessity. For generations, the American people have allowed our public schools to train a more and more ignorant people. I'm not talking about our ever-falling math and English scores. I'm talking about people who do not know the Constitution, what their rights are, and certainly not how to defend and assert them. For 25 years, Freedom Forum has surveyed Americans regarding their knowledge and opinions regarding the First Amendment. According to the last report, the State of the First Amendment in 2019, 29% of those surveyed could not name a single freedom protected by the First Amendment. This was a vast improvement, by the way, over the 2018 survey, where 40% could not recall a single freedom. Is it any wonder the concepts of freedom of religion, speech, and press are no longer regarded as being central to American society as they once were? We, the people, have blindly handed over the rising generation to government schools without any supervision or oversight. Now we're shocked that government schools do not teach our children to be free, but to be dependent on government. Now, after the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Benjamin Franklin was famously asked, "Well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy?" His response should be ringing in the ears of every American in this day and age. A republic, if you can keep it. Listen to politicians and pundits, and you rarely hear the United States even referred to as a republic anymore. We hear about threats to our democracy, champions of our democracy, and even the necessity of protecting our democracy, which all shows how universally ignorant we the people have become about our nation. How are we supposed to keep our republic if we don't even recognize it as one? Which may explain some of the calls for change we keep hearing in the media. Take, for example, the attempt to abolish the so-called Electoral College. I say so-called because not only is the term Electoral College nowhere in the Constitution, but there is not a single gathering of the presidential electors. From the 12th Amendment, we find, "The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president." Every 4 years, we repeatedly hear about the Electoral College from politicians, pundits, media, and even everyday citizens. And based on what they're saying, they're just as ignorant about the presidential election process as I was back when I tried to explain it to my international colleagues. Another example of our universal ignorance is the repeated discussion of the national popular vote for president. There is no national popular vote for president, and there never has been. Since the beginning of the Republic, the states have elected the president, not the people. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which a state may be entitled in the Congress. Even the states have gotten into the game of making sure the American people are ignorant of their Constitution. Just 8 years ago, the majority of state ballots stated that the people were voting for electors for president and vice president. 4 years ago, though, 3/4 of the states lied to their citizens, telling them they were voting for president and vice president. However, the states still appointed electors that then voted for president and vice president. How can we keep a republic when we not only do not know who is electing people to what positions, or even that we are a republic in the first place? It still amazes me to this day that roughly 90% of federal agencies are not constitutional. I found out while researching my book that 90% of the federal departments and agencies are not exercising powers delegated to the United States by the Constitution. And as the 10th Amendment states, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Now consider that while Congress generally passes a few hundred laws each year, these federal agencies promulgate thousands of rules each and every year. And each year, those rules are having a greater impact on our society. As if that isn't bad enough, based on some research I did on the website usaspending.gov, approximately 60% of every dollar the United States government spends is for unconstitutional purposes. For these and many other reasons, there have been repeated calls to amend the Constitution. Some have called for Congress to promote amendments to fix some of the problems. Joe Biden has asked Congress to propose an amendment stating that there is no presidential immunity. Others have called for a convention for proposing amendments to do everything from imposing term limits to requiring a balanced budget. Many are concerned that such a convention would lead to an overall rewriting of the Constitution. The problem is the Constitution doesn't need to be rewritten. It just needs to be reread. One of the major reasons I hear people talk about amending the Constitution is to rein in these out-of-control federal agencies, and especially the rules they keep promulgating. However, a quick reading of the Supremacy Clause in the 10th Amendment proves we already have the tools to do so. Starting with the Supremacy Clause. This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. While this clause makes quite clear what the supreme law of the land is, it also allows us to determine what is not the supreme law of the land. Federal regulations are not listed as the supreme law of the land, so they are not. In fact, they are not law at all, since Article 1, Section 1 clearly states, all legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All power for making laws, legislative power, is vested in Congress. Now, since all federal departments and agencies are part of the executive branch, they are prohibited from making laws or anything treated as such. And since the Constitution does not delegate to Congress the power to delegate the power to make laws, every piece of legislation where they claim to is itself unconstitutional. And according to Alexander Hamilton and several Supreme Court decisions, such acts are void and of no effect. Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist 78, no legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution, can be valid. To deny this would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than his principal, that the servant is above his master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men acting by virtue of powers may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but what they forbid. From Marbury versus Madison we read, certainly all those who have framed written constitutions contemplate them as forming the fundamental and paramount law of the nation, and consequently, the theory of every such government must be that an act of the legislature repugnant to the Constitution is void. Then in Ex parte Siebold we find, an unconstitutional law is void and is as no law. An offense created by it is not a crime. A conviction under it is not merely erroneous, but is illegal and void, and cannot be a legal cause of imprisonment. Finally, from Norton v. Shelby County, we find an unconstitutional act is not a law. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties. It affords no protection. It creates no office. It is, in legal contemplation, as inoperative as though it had never been passed. Since the Constitution did not delegate to Congress the power to create federal departments and agencies that enforce powers not delegated to the United States, all the legislation that created these agencies are unconstitutional and therefore void. Furthermore, all the legislation that appropriated money to these agencies is void, making their funding embezzlement. But Paul, if the Supreme Court has already weighed in on the legitimacy of these agencies, how can you claim they don't legally exist? Go back to the Supremacy Clause, and do you notice what is not the supreme law of the land? The decision of a court, any court, including the Supreme Court. I know you've been taught that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of what the Constitution says, but that simply is not true. Nowhere in the Constitution is any part of the United States delegated the power to be the final arbiter of its meaning. So according to the 10th Amendment, that power is reserved. Well, who is that power reserved to? Well, since it's not prohibited by the Constitution of the states, and since the states are the only legitimate ratifiers of the Constitution and its amendments, they are the final word on what it means. Ladies and gentlemen, this is only the beginning. We have before us the question of how to enforce the limited and enumerated powers of the United States. How do we balance the federal budget? And how do we handle the powers that the federal government has illegally assumed? Let's face it, depending on where you start, we've been ignoring the Constitution between 100 and 200 years. It means a lot of mistakes have been made, and it's a giant mess to clean up. Regardless of how you would prioritize fixing the mess, I believe it starts with education. As Thomas Jefferson said, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it away from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power." Furthermore, I do not think we fix it through the public schools or even through private schools. Go back to what John Jay said. Every member of the state ought diligently to read and to study the Constitution of his country and teach the rising generation to be free. It is up to us to both diligently read and study the Constitution of the United States. I know it sounds daunting, but I can tell you from personal experience, it's not nearly as hard as you've been led to believe. Only after we have a grasp of the fundamental and paramount law can we judge if other laws are compliant with it, if our state should abide by them, and if our representatives are fulfilling their oath to support it. We will also be in a position to teach the rising generation to be free. Note, I did not say have schools teach the rising generation to be free. That is part of our responsibilities as parents. Also, we'll be able to prepare to defend and assert our rights and do so legally and legitimately. So as we celebrate Constitution Day, I can think of no better way to honor those who pledged their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to bring us freedom than to reread the document they gave us to help us keep the Republic. So this is Constitution Week, and on Tuesday we have Constitution Day. Now the question is, did you even know it? Are you prepared to celebrate it? Are you prepared to take it as an opportunity to read and study the document that helps outline your rights and gives you the tools to defend and assert them? Are you willing to take this time to teach the rising generation to be free? Whether your children are still small or, like mine, grown adults. This is a day we should celebrate. As often as people talk about rewriting the Constitution, it doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be reread. We need to take some time to read it, to study it, to understand that by those simple 8,000 words, that little booklet about yay thick, we know more about the laws than all the other laws. All the laws in all the law libraries and all those books, if they don't comply with that little document right there, are void. Think of what that means. Think of the power it puts in your hands to understand the paramount and fundamental laws of the nation. Think of the power it puts in your hands as you choose people to represent you and to defend you when you stand up and say, no, we didn't authorize you to do that. That law is void. That's an awful lot to do. And it's a lawful lot to expect of the American people. But we are supposed to be a free people. Our national anthem says we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. We cannot be the land of the free unless we're brave enough to take up the challenge of living that way. And that includes not only actually defending and asserting your rights, but teaching the rising generation to be free. Now, there's a lot you can learn about the Constitution and our history, and I recently partnered up with The Miracle of America. It's an interesting study guide that goes through some of the history of this country to not only talk about the Constitution, but to put it into context. Now, since you are listening to the Constitution study, you can get one of the lessons free. Lesson 3 talks about natural law and the religious history of this country, absolutely free. Just go to constitutionstudy.com/1776 study guide. That's 1776 study guide. Go there, take your free class. If you like it, sign up for the rest of it. It's a grand total of $17.76. Not exactly a wallet killer. Again, that's constitutionstudy.com/1776 study guide. And take your free lesson. And again, if you don't like it, then okay. I think you will like it enough to actually purchase it. Other thing you do, we can support companies that support our rights. Companies like Patriot Mobile, America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They support organizations like the NRA, Turning Point USA, and yes, the Constitution Study. Go to patriotmobile.com/constitution and find a plan that works for you. Maybe you'll get a family discount or other discount, but find one that works for you. When you check out, be sure to use the code Constitution and you'll get free activation. They've got great 3G and 4G coverage across the entire country using the same carriers, the same network the major carriers work. Their customer support is first rate and all US based. So again, go to patriotmobile.com/constitution to find a plan and use the code Constitution at checkout to get free activation. Or just head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. Check out the articles, check out the radio program, look at all the content I have there, even check out the store. Hopefully you'll find something interesting and share it with others so we get others to know about what's going on here, to learn about the Constitution Study and what they can do to actually regain their freedom in this crazy world. Hopefully that includes coming back and maybe bringing some friends the next time we meet here at the Constitution Study.